Hi there, thanks for joining me today. I'm Jackie, and if you joined me for my last video, you would have seen me make these two sweet little greeting cards, one with a lighthouse and one with a sailboat. And I really have gotten in the mood to work small because this winter I've made a number of very large projects. And sometimes when I finish a large project, I like to shift gears a bit and work small. Well, I got a bit carried away with working small. I made all of these small little greeting cards. What I do with these cards is I combine some fabric with some sea glass. I love fabric. I love sea glass. So putting the two of them together in a project is a lot of fun for me. So today I'm going to show you how I made cards I'm going to make cards kind of like this one with a sea glass flower and some really bright cheery colors in the background. I'm going to make 4 of them with 4 different color schemes. So join me for this video and I hope you really enjoy it. Typically when I'm making cards like this, I make them this size, which is 4 inches by 6 inches, or 5 by 7, which are standard sizes. But the ones that I'm going to show you today are going to be a little bit smaller and a little bit more delicate. So they're going to be 4 inches by 5 inches. So I hope you join me for this one and you really enjoy it. So these little cards, they're just sweet. They're fabric and then I quilt the fabric and put some sea glass on them. And because I use a fusible pellon, it's a fairly thick pellon, they're kind of stiff. Some people will make these, they call them postcards. And what I do is, because it's fusible, I fuse a piece of coordinating fabric on the back, and you can take your Sharpie marker and write a note on the back. You can see I've signed my name. But if I wanted to give this to somebody, I could write happy birthday, thinking of you, whatever I want to write. And then you give it to them and it makes a sweet little gift. So what do you need to make this? Well, I'm going to put a list of materials in the description down below, which may be helpful for you, but I'll show you here what you need. So first of all, what I've done is I've cut a piece of pellon, 4 inches by 5 inches, and I've fused a piece of coordinating fabric on the back. So in this case, this is an orange one that I'm making, so I've used orange fabric on the back. You don't have to use dyed fabric. I use a lot of dyed fabric in my work, but you can use commercial fabrics. You can use whatever you like. So I've also cut a piece of 4 inches. So this is 4 inches by 5 inches. My batting is 4.5 inches by 5.5 inches. Because you want to make this a tiny bit bigger, because after you sew it, then you trim it to the right size. And then I have some orange fabrics, strips of fabric. So I've got an orange piece. I have a piece of linen. You can use whatever you like here. I have another orange piece of fabric. I have a bit of cheesecloth. I have some more orange fabric that's all kind of light and airy. I've got a piece of felt that I think I'm going to sew on there. Anything that you want. I love making these strippy backgrounds. And then I have some coordinating thread. So I have some variegated orange thread to sew it all together. And I'm going to use some yellow thread to make the binding, to sew it all together in the end. And I have some coordinating orange embroidery floss, a dark orange and a light orange. And I've got some orange beads to add a little sparkle. And I really liked what I did here with these bugle beads to make the stem. So I've got some clear bugle beads that I'm going to use to make the stem. And then I've picked out some sea glass. So I have my 3 petals of white triangular sea glass, my 2 leaves with green triangular sea glass, and I've got everything I need to go. Now I'm going to make 4 of these. So I have coordinated some other materials in different colors. So I have enough things here. Sorry about that, I gotta move my thread out of the way. I have enough here to make a purple one, a green one, and a blue one. And I've got different strips of stuff. I've got some organza here, some yarn, some cording. You can use whatever you want for strips. And I have coordinated purple back that I've put on my pellon, coordinated green back, and a coordinated blue back. And then I have some embroidery floss, purple, green, blue, beads, purple, green, blue, and threads. So I've got variegated thread to sew it all together and clear thread to do my binding around the outside. So I'm all set to go. Oh, and of course my sea glass. I've picked out petals and leaves to make 3 more sea glass flowers. So let's get started on the orange one. I'll show you with the orange one, and then I'll show you how it turns out with my other ones. So I've come over to my sewing machine, and I have put my orange thread into the machine, and I have my free motion foot. Now this is something that you don't have to use a free motion if you don't want to. You can just sew straight lines across to attach all of these pieces together. But I like free motion, so I'm going to do that. So I'm taking my Pellon backing out, and I'm going to sew lines back and forth using free motion quilting. And I like this because it just sort of gives me a lot of free flow in my piece, and I like free motion quilting a lot. But if you want to just sew straight lines across, that's fine. You can do whatever you want. So there, I have all these wavy lines in my background, and all the pieces are well attached to my piece of batting. So now I'm just going to give this a really quick press with the iron just to set the stitches into the background. Really quick there, and then I will take my measuring ruler here and my rolling cutter, and I'm going to cut this. Trim it to 4 inches by 5 inches. 4 inches by 5 inches. Excellent. Now that fits perfectly onto my prepared back. Excellent. And I have done the same with the green one, the blue one, and the purple one. So as you can see, they've each had their layers of fabric put on top of a piece of batting, and then the stitching is all done. They've been pressed and trimmed. So now to do some handwork to add some details. So with my orange one, this is the one I'm starting with, I wanted to put a little piece of felt in here just to add another line, another layer. So I have my piece of embroidery floss, and I'm just going to, I've just laid that down there. I'll trim what I don't end up sewing on. And I'm just going to couch this on. So I'm going to sew stitches back and forth to hold this felt in place. And it's just to add another layer of interest in my background. I love doing handwork, so sometimes I get carried away and I do a lot of handwork on these little cards. And sometimes, just depending on what I've used for fabric and different layers, it doesn't need that much. So my plan is to put my sea glass petals coming down like this. So I want a really big flowery center for the flower right here in the middle. So just above this line right here. So what I'm planning to do here is to do these really loose French knots. So I have some orange embroidery floss here, and I'm just going to sew, I'm not pulling them tight. So you do a French knot, but then you leave some of the thread out. Don't pull it very tight. And it makes for these really loopy, lacy French knots. And I'm going to do a whole bunch of them in here to make this flower center. So you can see how embroidering those loose French knots makes this really kind of cool flower center. Now I'm going to add a few little beads in there just to give it a little sparkle, so it adds some more to the center of the flower. And although you may not be able to tell on the video, what will happen is that those beads will catch the light and it'll just add a depth to this that wouldn't be there without the beads. One of those subtle little additions that you have to look closely to see. I love doing that because, you know, people often look at something that you've made and they'll look at it overall, but you want to kind of draw them in to look closer and catch some of those other details that they may not notice on first glance. So that adds a nice little detail. Now I know I'm going to put my petals on here, and I want a stem that goes from the bottom of the flower down. So I'm going to use these clear bugle beads, and I'm going to sew a row of those. I just put those on there for measurement to say where do I want my stem to start. So I want to start about here. So I'll knock those off, and I'm just going to sew these on widthwise and just make a row of them going down to the bottom of the ground, and it will just make a nice stem. Kind of an interesting feature. These beads I find are great to catch the light too. So they just add a bit of a sparkle and shimmer. I love sparkle and shimmer. I think it's because of my time at the beach. I just love when you get that sun glittering off the water and, you know, or the wet sand and rocks in the sand, the sun glitters off it. I think that's where my love of glitter comes from. So I think that stem will work nicely, and then I will put a couple of leaves on here with some green sea glass when I go to add that. Now, what else can I add for details? I'd also like to put a few of these little bugle beads in the sky, just to add a little bit of glitter to the sky. There, that just adds another little sparkle there. And the other thing that I'd like to do is add some grasses. So I'm still sticking with my monochromatic theme. Things are all orange. And I'm just adding some texture and detail by just embroidering a few little lines here. So I have a few lines of embroidery there, a few lines there. And now I'm going to switch to some light orange embroidery floss to do some lines in the bottom part. So now I'm using this light colored embroidery floss to add some more detail and grasses. And you can see here that I'm doing some light colored embroidery, just little lines of embroidery floss. It just helps tack everything in place, but it also adds another layer and another bit of dimension to what's going on here. Now you can see where I did the darker embroidery floss up top on the light area, and it showed up quite well. And if I do some kind of grassy bits here at the bottom where there's the darker orange fabric with the lighter orange embroidery floss, it shows up really good. And it just adds some more grasses and details down here, which is, again, just another point of interest. So the more you add, the more interesting it gets. So I'm going to add some more French knots down around the bottom here. I don't know if you noticed, but I don't get overly anxious about where I'm putting things here, because I'm just adding some texture and detail to my background. And the whole idea of this is that it's going to create a nice background for my focal point, which is of course my sea glass. Sea glass is what it's all about here. Now I'm adding a few beads down here among all of these French knots and grasses. I just think that little bit of sparkle is going to be just what it needs to set the piece off and add that final little detail that's needed. The only other detail I think I will add in, now that I'm doing my beading here, is right along this line here, I'm going to put a row of beads on either side of the sea glass. So I added my beads down here and a row of beads right here. And now by the time I put my flower petals on and my leaves for down here, I think that has everything that it needs. So after finishing all the details on my orange card, I went ahead and did similar things on my green card and my purple card and my blue card. So I'm now ready to do the border on all four of them. So each of them has their back. So I've got the green back, the purple back, the blue back, and the orange back. Sea glass is not attached yet. I'll do the binding, I'll bind them all together before I put the sea glass on. So to do the binding, I'm going to use a satin stitch. So to do a satin stitch, I'm going to need coordinating thread. So I've got yellow thread and a yellow bobbin. In order to make this work, you need to have the same color thread in your bobbin as in your machine. And so I've got blue for my blue piece, purple for my purple piece, and green for my green piece. So let me demonstrate on the orange card. I'm going to take this, make sure that it's all trimmed up evenly around the end so that the size of my card is the same as the size of my back. And I'm going to take it over to my machine. So to do the satin stitch for the border, I put my walking foot in my machine. I have my yellow thread in the top and in the bobbin, and my stitch is set to zigzag, and I have the longest stitch width and the shortest stitch length. I won't give you the numbers because everybody's machine operates different. So just think of the longest stitch width you have and the shortest stitch length that you have. And then you just sew all the way around the edge of your piece. And it sews the top to the back, and it gives you a tiny little border all the way around. And there you go. I have the two pieces sewn, the front and the back sewn together, and I've got a nice yellow border all the way around. So I have all four borders done. Now to attach the sea glass. So I'm going to arrange 3 triangular shaped pieces of white sea glass to make this flower coming down from the center of the flower, and 2 leaves. So that's what I'll do on each of these. Play around with my sea glass till I find just the right arrangement for each one. So there you go. I have all 4 cards with sea glass flowers. And to attach the sea glass on, I'm using my Quick Seal Kitchen and Bath Adhesive Caulk. This is what I use for all of my sea glass art. It glues sea glass on glass, it glues sea glass on fabric, driftwood, whatever you want to use it for, it's going to work really well. So I'm going to put some sea glass on the back of each piece, or sorry, some silicone on the back of each piece of sea glass, attach it, and let it set, and then my cards are going to be ready to give away. I find these make the sweetest little gifts. These ones are 4 inches by 5 inches, so if a person wanted to frame it, they could, or they could set it on a little, one of those mini easels, or they could just put it in their drawer. They could do whatever they want. So there, and then this needs some time to set because silicone always does, but you can take a Sharpie marker, you can sign your name on the back, you can write a note, sweet little gift, and piece of art at the same time. So I really hope you enjoyed this sea glass project. I hope it gave you some good ideas of something different you can do with your sea glass. And until my next video, I hope you are able to get to the beach and find some nice sea glass.